I'm going to talk about our audit requirements. Obviously, we're the auditors. If you're not familiar with us, my name is Chase Lennon. I have worked at the Board of Accounts for over 7 years now. I went to Ball State University and I got hired at the Board of Accounts right out of college. From Kokomo, Indiana, so more rural area. My house in Kokomo is surrounded by all cornfields, so I'm used to the country. I do live in Indy now with my wife, and I have 2 dogs, no kids yet. And then I have my partner Jonathan here. He's going to do some other presentations, and he can introduce himself at the next presentation if he'd like. So the most important slide all day is our contact information. Most people put it at the end. I like putting it at the front because really, if you fall asleep, you can't connect, you just don't hear what I say, it's not processing, contact us. That's what we're here for. So I have on the slide our website, and that's specifically the Township page, have our phone number, and then our email address. So obviously, we sometimes do conferences and present at certain things, so you may not always be able to catch us by phone. So if that's the case, then our phone staff will take a message and email it to us, and then we'll get back with you when we can. So saying that, our email address is the best way to contact us. It is the shared email account, the school.townships, so it has the S on the end of both of those, schools.townships at sboa.in.gov, and that's the best way we can be reached. And if you're a newer trustee, just any kind of question you could think of, if we can't really answer it or if it's not in our wheelhouse, we have relationships with other state agencies like the Department of Local Government and Finance, just other agencies that you may need to have us put you in contact with if you're just not sure where to go. So please feel free to reach out to us if you need anything. Just a little bit about us as the State Board of Accounts. We were created in 1909 in response to widespread corruption. I won't read our mission statement there. You can just read that, but essentially we want to instill confidence in the information that's posted on Gateway and our audit reports and just government, local government in general, because we audit state, we audit local government, we audit cities, towns, counties, special districts, even some not-for-profit entities if they receive federal funds over a certain threshold. But it's not just audits that we do, we have other responsibilities. We prescribe the forms and procedures that government units have to do. So for example, like your township ledger, that the big ledger, if you haven't moved on to a computer system, we prescribe that. That's one of the forms in the township manual. So we have to do that for all government units. We do recounts. So if there is an election and a recount is called, then it's our staff that actually goes in and do those recounts. I've never had the honor of doing that, but I assume it's a really fun thing to do. We provide local training to officials. We do consulting services via email, web conferences, and things like that. We have some other duties and statute here and there as well. So I haven't updated this since March. It may have changed, but we're kind of organized in this manner where we have the board. We have the state examiner, which you saw Paul Joyce and heard from him earlier. And then there are 2 of his deputy state examiners. It's Mike Bazinski and then Tammy White. And then in the office, we have directors over each of our areas. We group them together. So over schools and townships, we have Jonathan and myself. We have 2 directors over cities and towns and special districts. She's actually sitting in the corner over here observing. And then we have 2 directors for counties. And then in the field, where our auditors who do the work, the auditing work, we have coordinators where they coordinate staff and help them get the audits done, answer questions, technical questions, and things like that. And then we have field examiners who do the audits, who most likely is who you've interacted with in the past. So other than that, we have investigation coordinators, which you probably don't want to meet them, but they are nice people. That's normally the group that if we have some misappropriated funds or some misappropriation of assets or just some really bad compliance issues, and we send them in to do a special investigation. So if you look on our website, we have different types of reports. I'll go over that earlier, but a special investigation report would come from that group. So I wanted to first just start with how often are you audited? The statute did change a few years ago, where now we have the ability to assess units on a risk-based criteria. And what that means is based upon your risk, then we choose when we can audit you. But it should not exceed once every 4 years, at least for townships. And we gather that information in Gateway. So those questions at the beginning of the AFR that you answer and you wonder why we're even asking some of these questions. We take that information, we take what you give us in the monthly uploads, information forwarded to us throughout the year, like me and Jonathan take calls, maybe a citizen calls and gives us information, things like that. We accumulate that and we determine what your risk is. So that could affect when you're audited as well, but it shouldn't go longer than 4 years because we are currently caught up on our audits. So depending on the size of the township, whether you have a large amount of debt issued, that we'll take that into account when deciding what kind of engagement we'll do on your township. So the type of audits that we can do are like a financial audit. That would be one that takes more time. We have to gather more evidence and we actually issue an opinion on your financial statements. And then the next type of engagement, we can do a federal audit, where if you receive federal funds over $750,000, then you would need to have what's typically called a single audit, a federal audit. And I'll be talking about these later in the presentation, but we can also do compliance reviews or reviews, which is just less in scope. We don't look as deep and we don't have the same type of opinion. And those type of engagements are usually done on the units that are less risky. And then, like I said, special investigation. We perform those as needed. So I kind of already went through all of these. This slide was actually made before we did the in-person meetings. So at that time, we were just gearing up to do remote auditing. The centralized compliance is what we called it. It was kind of a pilot where we have examiners in our office and we do remote audits. I'm very glad that we did that in advance of the pandemic because we are set up very well to audit remotely. And I think I have actually a section in this presentation about remote auditing, and I'll just wait to talk until I get to that slide. So if you see centralized engagements, that's kind of where we're coming from. That's where that group was called, but really all of our auditors are 99% are working remotely right now. But we do have a director over financial engagement is what I think her title is now. It used to be the group called Engagement Strategies, maybe they're still called that, but her name is Beth Kelly. And so if she could take questions on when you're audited, if you have questions like when you're next going to be contacted by a field examiner, when you should expect forms to start filling out and things like that. So you can use our general communications email address to contact her. And if our communications director determines it's really a question for us, they can forward that to us pretty quickly. So it really doesn't matter what kind of email you use. But like I said, we were starting on this kind of remote auditing process early, and we were focusing on being more efficient and delivering you the same quality audit at a less cost. And we were making good headway on that. And then the public health emergency happened. So we had to go full throttle into the remote auditing. So before the public health emergency, we had the centralized compliance engagement. Specifically, we were doing on townships and smaller units. And what we looked at in those, what we still look at, are gateway files that you upload and other information that we request. Beth Kelly said that you could request for on-site assistance, and we would take those requests and grant those on a case-by-case basis. So it's still engagement, it's still a type of an audit where we're still going to give you a report at the end of your engagement, and you can keep that. And even if you don't get a financial audit, it still requires or fulfills our responsibility to audit your unit for that year. So after whatever engagement you get, you most likely won't need another audit until you come back up on the schedule, unless something happens, like if you do issue a bond or you do get debt and your debt covenant or your agreement requires you to have a financial statement audit with an opinion. So like I said earlier, we would only be doing this centralized compliance review or reviews on entities that are assessed at a lower moderate risk. Here, I have a flow chart, and I'm trying to get the point across that what we do is kind of integral in what you do, because it's just a continual process. Us actually coming into the township, auditing, giving you the report and the findings, that's just one small part of the whole audit process, in my mind. We don't just come in, give you your report, and then you wave at us and say, hey, see you in 4 years. What we put in the report, the findings, you should be focused on fixing. That should be a tool. You should look at it as this is an opportunity to make the township better, keep you out of trouble, depending on what the kind of issues you have. So once you receive the audit report, please review that with your board. I'm at the red bubble now, and just talk about it, discuss how you will fix it. We do have a process where if you have a repeat finding, and I'll talk about that later, you have to give us a corrective action plan and tell us how you're going to fix the finding. But you really should be doing that with any finding. Just locally, you should be discussing how you're going to fix that before the next audit, and then prepare for that, update your policies and manuals, tweak internal controls so they can be in compliance with what we were looking at last time, and then we'll come back in for audit. So all of that will be done over time. Hope that gives you more of a picture of like why we do what we do, and we hope that it's helping you be better. So how a actual audit flows, we start with an entrance conference, and at that entrance conference, the few examiners, it's probably via phone now, it used to be in person. We are explaining the objectives of the engagement. So whether we're testing for non-compliance, whether we're obtaining assurance to issue an opinion, we'll let you know what kind of engagement we're doing, what our responsibility is, and then after that we will explain what management's responsibility is. So management being the trustee and the board, what their responsibility is, and they do have responsibilities, and that is to, part of it is to have financial statements that we can audit. Internal controls, implementing internal controls is management's responsibility, not the auditor's responsibility. We can give suggestions, we can write manuals, but we can't really tell you what to implement and then also audit those same controls. That's an independence issue. So we explain all of that. We inform management of the fees, any records we may request, and then estimated timeline of the engagement when we expect to be finished. So I have here kind of highlighted, please ask any questions you have when you do the entrance conference. If you're not clear on anything, please ask. If after you meet with them, please don't hesitate to reach out, call them, schedule a Teams meeting, which would be a virtual conference meeting. You should be very clear once you leave the entrance conference room what is going to happen and why it's happening. So then once you have the entrance conference, hopefully, okay, this is Form 13. We will send you the Form 13, and this documents the approval of the financial statements. So why we need this is because what you file in Gateway in the annual financial report, those are your financials. We do have a process up here in our office where it goes through a macro, and then it puts your financial information into the regulatory format. So that essentially just means it makes your financial statements appear the way that they do in the audit report. And once we do that, we're going to hand you the Form 13, and then you'll need to verify that the financials that we're giving you match your records. So be that your computer system, your paper ledger, they need to match. And then once they do, you can sign off and approve, yes, these are my financials, and then we can start the audit. If they don't match, let us know. We can do some preliminary work, or maybe you would need to do some investigation, and then we can suggest corrections to your records. And then once they do match, then you can sign that off, and then we can start the audit. I don't think we're using this now, but I did want to make everyone aware that there is a form out there where if we do pick up records, we should be marking down what we took, when we took it, and then when we returned it. So just letting you know that's out there, and that's the procedure that they should be following. But again, we're in a remote audit environment now. Sorry, I went backwards. So what we normally ask for on that form is kind of hard to read, so I put it on the slide. We're going to ask for the board minutes, but again, we already get those in the monthly uploads. So maybe if you had special meeting minutes, those might not be uploaded. So we might ask for those, but we should be able to get all those through Gateway. Any resolutions that you passed since the last audit period, any contracts you entered into, definitely your financial records of your ledger. We'll ask for reconcilements. The monthly reconcilements is probably the most important thing you can do to make sure that your finances are in order. It's a really strong control that you can implement, and in statute you're required to. We put it in monthly in every bulletin article, that statute. But we're going to ask definitely for your reconcilements. If you have any investments, please keep track of those. We're going to be asking for a list of your investments and supporting documentation. Any debt documents, same thing there. If you have debt, we're going to ask for a list of what debt you have. Any receipt documentation, if you collect anything other than tax remittances. Payroll records, just make sure that those are in order before we come in. So the actual things that we do in a compliance engagement, at least for an audit, we'll do more substantive testing and things like that, but what you can at least expect us to do are comparisons from the annual financial report, what you put in Gateway to the ledger. So if those two don't match, then we'll most likely have an audit finding and or audit result and comment. That's what it's called. I'll talk about the different type of findings later in the presentation, but we'll note in the audit report how much you were off or what the differences were. If you expend in excess of your appropriations, so if you budgeted $10,000 out of the township fund, you spent $20,000, probably going to have a finding that you overspent your appropriation. We're definitely going to look at your bank reconcilements, like I just said. Make sure that salaries were paid in accordance with contracts, if you have any contracts. Mostly what we're going to ask for is a salary resolution, and that is the Form 17. We have a sample in the township manual, I believe, but it's not a prescribed form, and you can use that sample or you can come up with your own, but you need to be setting the salaries each year for the official and your board, all employees. There are certain statutes where, like the trustee, they can't change the salary until the next year, but regardless of when you can or can't change salaries, you need to set those, and we're going to be asking for that salary resolution, and make sure that you're not paid over that amount. That's very important because that's the amount that was approved by the board, and if you're paid over that amount, most likely we'll ask you to pay that back to the township. So it's very important that you set the salaries and you do that in a public meeting and you have that Form 17. Any payroll remittances, like to the Department of Revenue or the IRS, definitely make sure that those were filed correctly. And your disbursements, we'll most likely be testing a sample of disbursements where we'll be looking for supporting documentation, be it a township assistance item or just something else you purchased, making sure that you use the proper forms, recorded the entries correctly, and whatever documentation you kept, invoices, receipts, things like that. We're going to check to see if you're properly bonded. You do upload that in Gateway, so we do have access to the bond, but many times maybe you put the wrong year of the bond, or just you didn't upload the pages that we needed. So if we can't get that in Gateway, then we may ask for it again when we start the audit. And the one thing that I've highlighted, and I think it's important to note, is that we're going to be asking for prior comments, and we're going to be taking a look at your old audit report, the one before that you got those resolved. So double check your last audit, even if it wasn't during your term, and look at those findings and just make sure that those are resolved, because we will be asking about it. So the next two slides, I talk about two forms, and these forms could be sent to you months in advance or weeks in advance, depending on what the auditors are working on, what their schedule is. But these two forms need to be filled out as quickly as you can, and definitely before the audit starts, you need to have these complete. It would really help us get started quickly. It makes the audit more efficient. It makes it cost less. So we spend less time on your audit, so you'll have a cheaper audit. Not necessarily cheaper, but less cost. So the first form, the Form 7, it talks about internal controls, and essentially that gives us an understanding of what controls you have in place. So these two forms are in auditor lingo, is what I like to call it. It's not plain English all of the time. So if you don't understand something, or if you need just help answering some of the questions, please reach out to the auditor. Jonathan and I could walk you through it. But if they're working on your audit, please reach out to them. They'll know how to answer those questions. So that just gives us an understanding of your internal controls so we can start the audit, and that is required per the auditing standards. It's not just some busy work that we're making you do that we could do ourselves. You need to be doing that. And then the next form is the Form 9. It sometimes called the unit profile, or understanding the entity and its environment. Again, this is also required by auditing standards, and auditors need to gain an understanding of the entity, the unit that we're auditing, and what environment that they are operating in. So I think this is maybe a shorter form, but it's more collecting information about your township, what kind of departments you have, like if you contract with your fire department or if you have your own fire department, just getting an understanding of how your township runs so we can better audit that unit. So you fill out those two forms, you have the entrance conference, we do all of our testing, and then we get to this point where we're getting to the end of the audit, and maybe we found some differences in what you put in Gateway in your records, or maybe a certain fund balance is off and the other one corrected. How we communicate those differences to you is on the Form 22. It's called the Accumulation of Audit Differences. And we will identify all the errors that we found and provide that to you. If it is material, where it would affect our opinion and not give a clean opinion, if it is a material difference, then we'll suggest corrections to your records at that time, and then you can make those corrections if you agree. And if not, if you don't agree, then we most likely will have to modify the audit opinion. So once we get to that point, all the testing's done, we've probably had our preliminary exit conference, or at least discussed what the findings could be. And then now we have the exit conference that we schedule. We will provide a draft report at the exit conference. You will have a chance to respond to comments. You'll have 10 days, 10 business days, it's an important distinction to make, to respond. So if you either don't agree, if you just want the public to have more information of why this happened, you can respond, and then your response will be included in the report. But please note that this is a public document, so maybe try to be cordial, or just don't put things in there where you want the public to see what you wrote. So those will be on our website. Once you go through the exit conference, and during the exit conference, we're going to verify that your term is correct, because we don't want to have your incorrect term in the report. We're going to double check emails and physical addresses, and we will be sending a copy of the report to those email addresses. So that's why we verify those, so we can send it to your board and the trustee when it is filed. So after that, it'll go on our website. There's a waiting period in between, and then it'll go on our website, and then you'll be emailed a copy of it. So that's kind of just generally how the audit process goes. But we get the question on how do you prepare for an audit? What specific things should you do? I would recommend that you have the following things in order. Make your life a lot easier so you aren't scrambling to do things right when the audit starts. Make sure that you are doing your monthly reconcilements. It's very important. If there's any differences between your reconcilements between the book and the bank, that you're investigating those, you're trying to figure out what those are. You aren't just carrying those forward without doing any investigating. So make sure those are in order. Make sure all your schedules are complete. A lot of these are in Gateway, like the capital asset listing, your investments. Make sure you're doing your inventory, things like that. I already mentioned this briefly, but supporting documentation, and more importantly, just making sure that they're in an orderly fashion, maybe based upon date, maybe based upon fund, maybe have all your township assistance applications and expenses in there in one filing cabinet. However you do it, just make sure it's orderly so you can easily pull it and scan it to us. Make sure employee pay was correct. That's definitely something we're going to be looking at. That the correct forms, the W-2s are filled out correctly for employees. And one thing I wanted to note that the board is considered an employee for tax withholding purposes. So you need to do W-2s for them. Make sure you got the Form 17 where you set the salaries. You get that ready, and make sure the entries are correct in the ledger. I know sometimes that's one of the most complicated things you could do in the ledger is the withholdings part of it. So if you have questions, we do have a presentation online about that. You can reach out to us. But another thing I would suggest is just verify policies are updated. You really shouldn't have a policy that's been outdated more than a year or so. So like the township, the local standards for township assistants, just your internal control policies, things like that. Just verify that those are updated. And come with a list of questions again. Maybe it's not related to the audit, but just things you want to know. Feel free to ask. If they can't answer, then you can call Jonathan or myself. So on this slide, I have some more tips where it might get you through an audit a little faster or just with less pain. You could keep track of any restricted grants, gifts, donations, etc. What I mean by restricted is if somebody gives you a donation to be used for a specific purpose, then we're going to be checking to see that you use that money for whatever purpose they restricted it to. So make sure you're tracking that correctly. Keep all your internal control documentation together. Like if you send your ledger to the board or if the board approves disbursements in your internal control policy, make sure the record of those approvals are kept together with your internal control policies, and you can easily give that to us. Again, these are just tips. You don't have to do this, but it'd make it easier on you. And if you respond really quickly to our inquiries, like you don't even have to say, like, scramble to get it to us immediately. Just respond back when we email you and say, thank you, I've received this request. I will get it to you on this time. That really helps us. So you have a smaller audit bill. We aren't just sitting working on your audit, because our auditors, they're working on multiple engagements out in the field, and they need to have more information like that so they can, properly use the time on whatever engagement that they're doing. One thing, my old partner Ryan suggested that maybe you could establish an auditor file where just anything you think that we would want to know about, you could put things in there. So the regulatory agent, like any regulatory agency correspondence, like if DLGF or some other agency sent you some correspondence or an email on a certain issue, you can keep that together and provide that to us just so we know what's going on. Like any contracts you enter into, any lawsuits, like if any pending lawsuits, you keep those together just so we're aware. Might need to be a no disclosure depending on the type of lawsuit. You can put your reconciliations in there, just really anything that we would ask for. It's probably the third or fourth time that I said ask us questions, but please ask us questions. That's what we're here for, ask the co-examiner questions. And the reason I put it on this slide is because that repeat comments, they do have consequences. In 2017, we trained about House Bill 1031, And there's more information on our website about corrective action plans, how to file them, and I'm not going to go into that. But if you have a repeat finding where the prior audit report has an issue or a similar issue to what you're getting in the subsequent audit, then that's called a repeat finding. And then you'll have to do a corrective action plan. And before the field examiner leaves, make sure you understand how to fix it, or at least some suggestions on how to fix it. Because you don't want the examiners to leave and then you're sitting there filling out your corrective action plan and you don't know what to put in it. So please ask questions at that time. If not, if you forget some things to ask, you can contact me and Jonathan. And it's important to implement those fixes immediately. Don't just, like I said earlier, it's a continual cycle, something you need to be working on and think about constantly. Don't just wait 4 years. You know, the auditors are coming in a month, I'll just fix it a week before they get here, because we're auditing that whole period. And maybe it takes you a year to get that fix implemented, but since that issue was happening during that year, it's still going to most likely be a finding. So that kind of overshadows all the good work that you did for the rest of the years. So that's why it's a good idea to try to find a fix, get the fix implemented quickly, so we don't have that finding again or a similar finding. Please don't panic. The auditors are not that scary of people. Please don't try to hide things. We are here to help. We should be viewed as like a resource and just an opportunity to help you get back on track and answer questions. We're not your adversary. We all have jobs to do. Please don't be afraid to ask questions again. I say that, but truly try to make an extra effort to do so. And don't look at an audit as something to complicate your life. Like I said, it's an irreplaceable tool, and most of the townships are getting our services at our daily statutory rate, which is a bargain. Just contact a CPA firm and see how much they would charge you to do the same quality audit. So after we do all the audit, you get your audit report. We will send you a statement of engagement cost. And on that statement of engagement cost, we are going to have the number of days we spent on the audit, the daily and hourly rate, depending on what type of unit you are, and then any report processing fees that in statute we are allowed to charge. I wanted to bold this bullet point. This is not an invoice to be paid, so you don't need to pay this. The cost of the audit will come out of the next distribution from the county. So just please keep this statement as documentation. If the county takes it out of a fund where you didn't want it to come out of, then we won't take exception to you having those audit costs being paid out of any of the property tax funds. So on the next slide here, I think, no, I'll talk about the next presentation, but you can reimburse whatever fund you want. So like the township fund, if you want to come out of there and they took it out of township assistance, you can reimburse that fund, and that's okay. Do you have any questions?
Just one. They wanted to know, at the entrance conference, is it possible for the auditor to give us a list of items that they require to help streamline the process, thus reducing the hours required to perform the audit and reducing the cost to the township? Definitely, you can request a list of the items that they think they may need. Obviously, as they get into it, they may need some additional items, but definitely that's something you can request at the entrance conference.
Yes, you can definitely request the field examiner to give you a list of items they will be asking for. That'd probably even be a good practice to do. That's the only question that we had so far. Jonathan said, I'm not really monitoring the chat right now, but I have a section in here about remote auditing. Do I have 15 minutes left? Yeah, okay. Like I said earlier, our auditor is working 99% from home. So in order to be as efficient as possible, you'll be getting those documents. Like I said, those forms they need to fill out. Please fill those out as soon as you can. Any requests, when they come to you, they're going to come via email or phone. And we do have the option to meet virtually. So please ask for a virtual meeting. They would love that. You can even extend those meetings to me, myself and Jonathan. Like if you have an issue not related to the audit that you need help with and you need to share documents on the screen or something like that, request a WebEx meeting or a Teams meeting and Jonathan and I can help you. But also request that in an audit. They're used to using that. Any documentation that you do send though, please don't send it via email. And the field examiner should give you instructions, but you'll be uploading that in Gateway in the same kind of platform where you upload the monthly uploads. And the reason we're doing that is because it's a secure environment and like hackers or you send it to the wrong email address. We just want to make sure that your information doesn't get out there where it shouldn't be if it has sensitive information in it. Explain what your COVID-19 protocol is. Like if you have your building closed or if you're only open for a certain amount of days or only employees are allowed in, things like that. Just let the auditor know what that is so we can properly plan for it and then accommodate with what your request is. And like I said earlier, please just let us know when you do receive a request. Be like, hey, I got it. I will get you the documentation later. I already stressed those forms that we sent. We will be sending before the audit. Please complete those and ensure that you're uploading monthly in Gateway. We do look at those, the monthly uploads, and that'll also make us get through the audit faster if you make sure that those are uploaded. Just a gentle reminder that remote auditing and this whole virtual environment that we live in now, it's new to us too. So please be patient. There's varying experience levels among field examiners and us in the office here. So just please be patient. Our auditors do enjoy being on site and we all hope to get back to that eventually, but now we're in this remote audit era, so we have to embrace it. So I got about 15 minutes left. I'm going to be going through some common compliance review comments where these are things when I was reviewing audit reports that I commonly saw in the reports. So if I don't get through all of this, I won't be too worried. I want to make sure there's enough time for the coronavirus information to be presented upon. And before I start, I just wanted to, I didn't say this at the beginning of the presentation, but all of these presentations are on our website at the very top of the Township page, and then probably a week later I'll move it down to the presentation section. So you'll be able to view all these presentations. Today it's there now. But the types of findings that you could get in your audit report, you could have an audit result and comment, or what we call an ARC, and that is a written comment. You could have a management letter, where that is just a letter to your board. And those are issues that we found that didn't rise to the level of being significant and impactful enough to let it be known to the public. So we still thought it was important enough to let you know so you can fix, but it's just not a written comment in the report. And most of the time in the next audit, we're going to ask to see if the management letter items were addressed. And if they weren't, it's possible that those will be a written finding next time. It's more like a warning, if you want to look at it that way. The verbal comments, kind of the same thing, it just won't be written down, like if we find something in the audit, but we still think it warranted your attention, we'll verbally communicate that to you via email, however we are communicating with you. And then the last type of finding is a federal finding. Those are a whole different type of beast, and sometimes they're hard to understand. So if you do a federal audit and you want help trying to understand it, please ask questions to the field and to myself and Jonathan. But that'll only apply if you're having a federal audit. For this statute, Indiana Code 5.11.127, it requires you to report misappropriation of funds to us. Now, this is not directly related to your materiality policy that you have to have for the state examiner directive. I'll go over that later. This is where if you find there was fraud or misappropriation of funds or assets, you need to contact us, even if it's a penny. Don't go by your materiality policy if it is fraud. If we find that you did not report fraud to us and you knew about it, then that's going to be 100% an audit finding every time. But if you come across this, it's really easy to report it to us. You can call us on the telephone, you can email, or there's some forms on the website on the front page and at the bottom of every single units page that you can submit that to us. I believe the section has that statute quoted. If there are errors between what you put in the AFR and what's on your ledger, what I've quoted here could be the criteria of, or not the criteria, but how the finding would look. We would just say it didn't match the records, and then we would list out where it didn't match and what fund it went to. I put the email for our Gateway Help Desk. Jonathan's going to talk more about Gateway later, but that is an email address that you can utilize that our staff look at, and they deal with just Gateway issues. So if you have any questions for AFR, 100R, etc., you can email them, or you can also email us and we can help too. A common finding is related to internal controls. Could be worded a little bit differently, but if you don't have internal controls, just to ensure proper, like say the disbursement of township funds, or just like reconciling, whatever the issue is, it's easy to throw a lot of issues into the internal control realm. So you'll see that finding frequently. So that's why it's important to make sure your internal control policy is updated and reviewed. Make sure you're actually have controls that mitigate the risk that you're trying to mitigate. If you pay any penalties or interest, then that's a common finding I've seen as well, where it could be like the Department of Revenue or the IRS just haven't paid the payroll taxes, filed the forms correctly. Maybe you have a late payment for a vendor. Those are things you can avoid. And a lot of these things are in Chapter 1 of the Township Manual. That it's just compliance guidelines that we write that you need to follow, and just some things you could avoid. So try to avoid penalties and interest. That's a common finding that we see. I think I hit this pretty hard earlier about fixing the salaries. Hopefully the comment about you having to pay back the amount if you pay yourself over that amount in the salary resolution caught your attention. But if you didn't fix the salaries in the Form 17, then we'll have this finding with that wording in the first bullet. If you don't issue W-2s, we will have this as the criteria. This is from Chapter 1 of the manual. And this says units are required to comply with all grant agreements, rules, regulations, bulletins, et cetera, of all federal and state agencies. So you need to be following what the other state agencies say, what the federal agencies say, and one of those federal agencies is the IRS. So just make sure you're issuing the W-2s, properly accounting for payroll, and things like that. I put a bullet at the bottom. I think someone asked me to add this. The IRS requires a 1099 to be issued to an employee that receives over $600 of non-employee payments. So this specifically, this question, I put this in here because like the rent that is paid to the township trustee, that needs to be on a 1099. If you don't have township assistance standards, that's pretty easy finding to write up. It's required in statute. I put the statute there where you need to have local township assistance standards. And I highlighted some of the important ones, but these are all in statute. You need to have standards that are proposed by the trustee, adopted by the board. You need to file that with the county commissioners, and you should be reviewing that annually, definitely updating it to reflect the changes in any cost of basic necessities. if there's any changes in the law, that too. And it needs to be in a single written document. And the reason that is because it needs to be visible and placed in every single office that you have where you process assistance applications. So if you have more than one office where you do township assistance, you need to have those standards available. If you don't deposit any receipts timely, then we will most likely write that up as well. The trustees, they have a specific statute where if you receive money, you have before the 1st and then the 15th of the month. So if you receive money on the 16th, then you have all the way into the 1st of the next month to deposit that. I would recommend your internal controls require you do that sooner, because that's just risk. If you do collect funds like that, like if you have like a park or some pool or something where you do collect cash, please make sure that's safeguarded and that is deposited by the times required in statute. If you don't file your AFR or 100R on time, you'll be receiving a subpoena. Some of you in this meeting may have received that letter recently, but in addition to that, if it's more than 30 days late, we will write that up and put it in the report. Again, please use that gateway email address if you have any issues with filing. Like I said earlier, we're going to be looking to see if you are properly bonded. And I don't have the statute up here, but for every $1 million of receipts that you receive, you're supposed to be bonded at least $30,000. So for most townships, your amount that you're required to be bonded is most likely $30,000. And I had a note here that I just want you to make sure that for your bond that you're covered for all of those 4 years. I heard from one township where they made a claim on their bond and they reached out to the insurance company and they are like, well, the $30,000 was for the 4-year period. So that's you're only covered for up to $7,500 per year. And that surprised me that could even be a thing, but just verify with your insurance company that you are covered for $30,000 for each year. Because if not, then you're not following that statute. If you don't do your bank reconcilements, this is the code that we're going to cite, that you don't reconcile monthly. Policies, if you didn't have a policy that's required either by chapter 1 of our manual or by whatever you are participating in, like for example, employee benefits. If you provide benefits to your employees, you need to have a policy that goes over that. If you have a credit card or debit card, you need to have a policy that goes over that. I did highlight the capital asset policy. Jonathan's going to talk about that in his enhanced regulatory presentation, so I'll just leave that be for now. If you don't have supporting documentation, such as receipts, invoices, just other public records, then we will write up that you did not have supporting documentation. So just keep everything and file it orderly, and you can avoid that. Please make sure you're recording your transactions as they happen. Don't go buy things and then say later, well, then I'll record it in the ledger tomorrow or something like that. That's an easy way to forget to put it in there. And if we find that your records are incomplete and they're not reflective of the actual activity of the township, then we'll most likely have a finding. Already talked about dispersing in excess of your appropriations in your budget. This is the statute that we would cite if you did that. We could possibly have a fund sources and uses comment. And what it says is sources and uses of funds must be limited to those authorized by the enabling law, resolution, or grant agreement. And what that means is that you used the money in a fund set up by statute accordingly, or ordinance, or resolution, etc. So for example, township assistance funds. In the township assistance statute, it says that those funds must be used on township assistance. So attached to an application or an employee that processes applications. Other than that, you should not use township assistance funds on fire. You shouldn't use it on anything else other than township assistance. And each of those funds, like for the fire fund, you should use that for the fire department. If you have your own, if you contract with one, like the township fund is more of the general fund. So if you use any of those funds outside of what they're supposed to be used for, this is the kind of finding you would receive. We talked about collecting overpayments. Make sure that if you do overpay a vendor, that you try to get those payments back. Overdrawn cash balances. So any of your funds, they should not be in the red. They shouldn't go below zero. They shouldn't be negative. The only reason that should ever happen is if you have a reimbursement grant, as a federal reimbursement grant, where the way that works is, according to the agreement you have with them, you make eligible or allowable expenses, and then you submit claims for reimbursement, and they'll give you that money back. So temporarily, for a period of time, it would be in the red, but if you would expect to get that back and get it back to zero, that it's allowed then. But other than that, your funds should not be going in the red, and it really is a serious indicator of financial problems. So if you do have funds in the reds, that's something we'd be concerned with, and please reach out. We may be able to help. Right on time. Is there any questions, Jonathan?
We do have a few. If a remote audit, are we going to be expected to copy and scan all of our receipts? Their concerns there would be that it could take many hours to do. I think our field examiners will just request the receipts that they need to test possibly. And like Paul had said in his earlier comments, we can work out a way where we can come and get those records and scan them and bring those back. So if you don't think your office would have time, we can do that. Do you have anything else to add to that one before I go?
What a sample. Yeah.
Is there any reason why the townships cannot be all on the same accounting system? Like an example is Tom's Web. They think it would be more a unified system where townships would be able to communicate with each other. The State Board of Accounts doesn't require a specific software system. In fact, we prescribe manual forms, and then the units can use software, but the forms need to go through the approval process, and they should include all of the same information in the function as those forms. So we do not require a specific software. Question, I get a new bond every year. Am I supposed to be getting one for a 4-year period? I think a new bond every year is sufficient. And will there be internal control exceptions for working remotely during COVID-19? Hopefully you have adopted some policies to follow during COVID-19 and those public health emergencies, and you would provide us with those policies, and we would just ensure that you follow those policies that you've implemented during the public health emergency.
Is that all the questions? Okay. I think another comment to the bond, when I was talking about a period of time, I think I was more referring to if you have a continuous bond or a crime insurance policy that covers multiple years. I think the best practice would be to have a yearly bond. So it looks like we are at break time. Please be back here at 10:30. So bathroom breaks, you can ask us some questions. Just take a break and we'll resume after 10:30.